All right, what's up, Nate? We're finally
How you
recording again.
doing?
Had some difficulties to get going, but
Yeah.
I, I'm glad you came on the podcast. Thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to know about what exactly got you into the bioenergetic view because I know like a lot of people get into it for different reasons, but most of the time it's due to poor health and other trial and error runs with health that have kind of gone sideways. So I'm curious for you what happened.
Yeah, I was experiencing just issues with my health. This is around the end of 2020, midway through 2020. I started getting like hair shedding, like hair loss, and I'd also get a lot of like face bloating, and it seemingly went with like stress, and I couldn't really piece it together. So just looking through like what I could possibly be experiencing, I figured out that okay, hypothyroidism is a possible cause of these issues. So then after I figured out okay, it might be possibly hypothyroid, then I ended up falling into a YouTube video. It's by Danny Roddy. So Danny Roddy, he's a huge proponent of the bioenergetic view. Talks a lot about Ray, and he seemed cool, he seemed interesting, but I thought the philosophy was so insane. I didn't really understand it. So I was looking at Danny's stuff for a while. Didn't really understand any of the stuff about Ray though. I would see the posts about like Ray's carrot salad or like anything about thyroid, and it'd be like, okay, this is, I don't really understand it. But after a while, things started to click. Like there would just be little things that Ray would write or Danny would write that would make complete sense and be able to explain something that could not have been explained before. Like almost like coming across it, it took multiple experiences to actually fully cement what I was experiencing being explained by this.
Yeah, I feel like I had somewhat of a similar view of like getting into it as well with just Danny and like kind of reading about it and like hearing about it, but not exactly knowing, like not seeming right because it's just completely different than what everyone else in the health world is saying, including like alternative health too. Like a lot of people who are on the alternative sphere like really disagree with a lot of this stuff they're saying. So I'm guessing just what got you into the like, or not what got you into it, but like what symptoms did you deal with like with hypothyroidism? Because I know a lot of people deal with it and they don't really know that they are dealing with it.
Yeah, well, really the main thing was I again, like I said, the hair loss and like the face bloating. But then when it got to the point where I realized, okay, this whole philosophy is really the way that things work. I mean, the idea of energy and structure being interconnected, that I think kind of led me to the idea that, okay, it makes sense that I was experiencing digestive issues. So most of my life, I didn't even realize that I had poor digestion, but it really all came together in like a few like 2 years ago about when I started getting symptoms like acid reflux and then slow motility. And these things, you could try any protocol that would be recommended by a standard doctor, and nothing would seem to help. And then ultimately, the only thing to improve the symptoms of like poor gut motility, just like bloating, brain fog, just all of these things all came back to okay, you need to promote the flow of energy, but how do you do that? And the whole thing is there's no one certain organ you can work on. There's no one certain mechanism. I mean, that's the idea I think of medication, it's thinking that things act on one certain place, but really it's a holistic system. And I think that was what the bioenergetic theory helped me to understand. But yeah, it's difficult to figure out what the path to go is, but I think what I always kept in mind was to avoid harm and then just understand where energy has gone wrong or where energy has gone static. And Ray's thesis is kind of like energy and structure are interdependent at every level, but also if we see any problem as a general disorder of energy, then we can kind of figure out where things go wrong in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of like interesting just because it's different than what traditional medicine, like you said, it's like treating the symptom versus kind of realizing that all these things are interconnected and it's not just one specific receptor or one specific medication that's going to fix you. It's kind of like a overhauling of your whole environment as well as like your lifestyle and all that. So I'm curious, like, what was the first kind of levers you moved when you started to go from a bio into a bioenergetic approach? Was it like dietary, lifestyle, or because I know Ray doesn't really like to like say like eat certain foods, so I'm curious to know like what you kind of started changing about your lifestyle and diet.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I knew about the philosophy for a while. I was getting into it, and just having the understanding of recommending carbs more, still high protein, but kind of just again the idea of avoiding seed oils, avoiding PUFA, which is in chicken, it's in like salmon, avocados, peanut butter, just like nuts, seeds, these things that people would think are generally healthy. That's actually something that can be looked at in the bioenergetic view as PUFA oxidized in the bloodstream and cause these issues. So I was probably the first thing that I started avoiding was just PUFA in general, just lowering my intake, especially just processed food or stuff like that. Like at the time of first getting into it, I was still eating like some like snack food or um just like Zog slop essentially, and a lot of it was giving me issues. So I got to the point where I had to cut things out and get down to as basic as possible. And it actually got to a point where I had to completely cut everything out for 3 days. That's how bad my digestive symptoms. I believe I had SIBO at the beginning of my like I guess like journey with this, and I had a extreme pain in my gut, like in like the right portion of my gut, and I again like I said I had to cut everything out. So from there I went like just beef and like slowly started adding back carbs. It started with orange juice, and then I added like strawberries, blueberries, a few other things, and after that it was just I need to keep going with the food that doesn't ferment or the food that doesn't impair digestion. So if I'm just thinking of nutrient rich foods that do not impair the flow of digestion and do not ferment, then what you get to is a pretty simple diet. You know, it's really just like beef, simple sugars usually, so like things that don't ferment, but still like I was getting symptoms from certain things that were high in like the FODMAPs. Like the Ray is generally like doesn't really talk about the FODMAPs, but it is kind of in line with what he recommends for easily digestible carbohydrates. So that was another thing. Just having low FODMAP fruit, and slowly after a while, then I was able to introduce dairy again. I loved dairy all my life. I would always drink milk, and I actually was an extremely picky eater, and really the only foods that I ate were essentially just peanut butter sandwich, not even jelly, peanut butter sandwich, fruits. I would drink peach juice, like I just drink like juice and eat candy and stuff, and milk and yogurt were pretty much the bulk of my diet. So yeah, it was like I was slowly able to add back dairy. I started with like Parmesan cheese. Now I like eating like a few more cheeses and stuff. But again, it was like months of this process, you know, because when things become to the point where it's so extreme, I mean, you can't look at it as just an event that happens and, oh yeah, I just all of a sudden got this issue. I mean, if I really think back to it, this has been my whole life leading to this degree of issues, but it was definitely exacerbated by like medications. Like I was on antibiotics for 3 years, like daily. So that's the type of thing that can actually contribute to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and actually to a more hypothyroid state. So if I really think about it, most of my life I was low thyroid, and then at the age of 20 or so, you know, stressed, and I think that's the type of thing where all of it comes together, and then I was kind of forced into it, you know. But it for me, it luckily gave me so much, and it actually forced me to learn so much. So the whole understanding that I have now is all out of necessity, and I think that is really the only way that someone can fall into this philosophy. But that's also the liberating thing too, because having a sort of person tell you what you need to do for health in my opinion, is never going to actually fix anything for someone because they always have something to fall back on. It's almost like the effect of, okay, now we have Google and people aren't as intelligent because they can just look it up, or ChatGPT or AI. It's like all of these things can be used as tools, but they need to be first understood by you yourself. You can't just take it and use that because I mean, I think that's where we get into the idea of like centralization. Like when you're just taking something from an authority or taking something from a source and not understanding it or not feeling the sense of this is what I need to be doing or I choose to do this. I think that's where we run into health issues. I think that's where we run into societal issues. It's all ultimately at the idea of like to me is intuition or following your gut. So like my whole thing was I am just going to keep listening to my intuition, and that is the thing that's going to be leading me to making the right decision. Any decision that I make, there's always something that I'm feeling within me that knows if it is good or bad. And that's the thing I think of listening to your senses and just kind of trusting your symptoms of what you're experiencing through the food that you're eating. So it was like if I were to eat like I tried vegetables like well cooked vegetables to help with like the just like the fiber to help like promote motility. I mean, Ray's a huge fan of like insoluble fiber, so like that was something that I did try, but I noticed it wasn't helping. So it's like all these things. It's like okay, well, insoluble fiber's not working, and then the like recommended doctors they would say like oh well you just need to stick with it like you just need to do this like that was always the thing you just need maybe you just need to take a Miralax every day like maybe that's the solution like that's just how it is but like I don't think there's ever a situation where someone needs to do something but I think that within themselves is where the answer lies. And that's the difficult thing, I think, because everything in the environment is turning you away from listening to your intuition. It's all suppressing it and it's trying to tell you that no, this is not good. You need to listen to the authorities. So I mean it's really interesting to think about because looking at it like, okay, well, what food do I eat? And then getting to the point of it's this complete ideological thing where it's like, this is the difference between centralized and decentralized. And it is eating food is this big. That's what Ray said. He was like, food is essentially politics. You know, it's a interesting thing once you're sort of in the world. And I think a lot more people are starting to see things in this sort of way now.
I think a lot of it has to do with just how you feel, like how different you feel when you eat certain foods versus other ones. And so many people are just eating certain foods that are slowing down their digestion for such a long period of time that they don't even know that they could feel a different way. So then when you start to feel a little bit different, you're like, oh, I want to just keep doing this, not go back to the old way. But I'm curious as
Yeah,
far as like,
it's
you can go.
oh yeah, it's just it's interesting because like we're kind of told to suppress the foods that or suppress our feelings if like we're eating sweets or something or essentially just like ice cream is bad for you, you gotta limit it. Or it's like something that I've heard like people say before is like older a few older people I've heard say this just in public was like, oh, you know, if it tastes good, I probably shouldn't be eating it, you know, it's probably gonna be causing me issues. Like literally just the code like the idea of things that taste good are bad for you or things that I enjoy are bad for me and I need to be disciplining and forcing everything. I mean it's so wild to think how normalized it is, you know.
And with that too, it's just like the whole idea of exercising and you needing to like exercise so much to then burn off the calories so you can go eat something, which is almost just like completely foreign to like the bioenergetic view where you actually want to be ingesting more calories than you're burning so that you have that extra energy to speed up your metabolism, use it for all the functions that you want to do to enhance your life. So I guess were you ever down that trap of like high forms of cardio that weren't serving you or any other stuff? Because I know for me, for a long time, I was just running just like 2 to 3 miles every single day, just trying to burn off calories. And I think that put me in a very high adrenaline state, along with like a lot of coffees on empty stomach, like fasting and stuff like that. So I guess what's your perspective on just like stress in general and how that equates to like your current view of it?
It's an interesting thing, like the exercise thing, is because I think when someone discovers this philosophy, this lifestyle, I think that they generally turn away from anything that gives them stress, just once understanding it. And I think that can actually be very detrimental, because I do think that we need to understand that we are here to live life. We're not here to avoid stress. We're here to move through stress. We're here to actually use it. But it's kind of hard to see it in that sense. I think like when you have a mission or something that you're looking towards or stimulating life, I think that there will be obstacles and there will be stressful events, and I think that's a good thing. But I think the whole thing that will help to get through that is understanding the bioenergetic framework of how to protect yourself. So I actually think though there are situations where the idea of avoiding stress is fully corrected, but again, I think it comes back to intuition. Like for me in particular, I was a runner when I grew up. I ran and I played basketball. So actually I got into working out after that in high school. So I was working out maybe like 5 to 6 days a week, and as I was sort of dealing with digestion issues, I realized that anytime I'd work out, it would just keep inflaming my gut, and I would just end up feeling worse and worse and just more bloated. And it got to the point where after trying to keep working out for a few months, I realized like this is just doing so much worse for me. And I just thought to myself, okay, if I want to function well, I have to stop working out. I mean, I don't see this helping me heal. I just see it getting worse and worse. So I cut out working out, and it's been like about a year and a half now. And my digestion has actually been able to improve, but anytime that I work out now, it's still giving me issues. But the thing that's interesting is like I realized in the process that looking good doesn't matter to functioning well. And it's a topic that I think is hard to discuss now when most guys are prioritizing appearance, especially with carnivore diet. Like you get lean, you look good, but the thing is usually you'll have things down the line go wrong. Usually digestion is a big thing for people. Being on like low carb diets for a long time. I mean, you are essentially just running off of cortisol and suppressing your thyroid. And this is why I think it's good now that people are finally coming to the idea that carnivore is a temporary thing and it should be a temporary thing. And I think the idea of, oh, this is what our ancestors ate is kind of just irrelevant to what we are. Because, I mean, if we think of what our ancestors did, I don't know what that means in the context of where we are now. That's what I think is missing from the whole primal lifestyle or the ancestral lifestyle. I think if we don't realize that we are on technology, where we are in the certain point in this current state of the world, I mean, I think doing something in the past can definitely inform, but there are things that we need to do now. Like the thing with one of Ray's first findings was again like the introduction of seed oils and the overconsumption of that is that we need to do things to counteract that. Just from all the accumulated PUFA in our fat stores. So it's like if we kept eating PUFA, I mean, it would only cause issues because it would just be oxidizing in our bloodstream. So we need to do things such as completely avoiding all PUFA, not just seed oils. So it's like that's like something that Ray sort of proposed, but it's like there are countless other examples of that, I think. But again, it's just like person needs to listen to their situation and not necessarily what seems like it would make someone feel good. I think it's important to try to understand the context of a long timeline. So
One of the things I've heard you say is that kind of when you're in this fast metabolism state and everything's going well, you have like a sense that time's like slowing down, and then it kind of speeds up when you're in poor health. And I feel like I've kind of felt that, and I feel like a lot of people have, where when you are sick, you kind of just want the time to go by. But I'm curious to know like how you kind of came across that conclusion and started to feel that in general.
yeah, it was interesting. I was really just interested by the idea. I heard Danny and Ray and Georgie talk about it on their podcast, Generative Energy. And I think it first started to come into my mind when I was thinking of the idea of, just speeding things up, or generally just like heat, speed, just anything that like I actually thought of this in the sense of like a saucepan, heating it up over a fire. I mean, you look at the particles of water start to shake and move around, and the more that you heat something up, it will start to evaporate, and it's to start to just speed up. Everything speeds up. So it was like that, as opposed to freezing, where things just become static and calcified in a way. And it's that sort of thing kind of went with, okay, the more energy you have, I mean, look at a hummingbird, look at things in nature. Everything that speeds up is generally moving at a pace that you just can't even perceive. And again, when you have more energy, you're able to fit more into time. And that's kind of where I thought about, oh, okay, if we're fitting more experience into time, then that would slow time down. But our experience of time, we're actually perceiving even more. So it doesn't feel like it, but we are, in a sense, slowing down time. And then when we are in the state of low energy, everything feels like it is going by so slowly, but because so much or so little is happening, because we're not experiencing a lot, time passes so quickly. We're wasting away. So that I think is it's a really interesting idea. I mean, it has also helped me to understand, I think, kind of learning, because I always had trouble learning. It would always take me a while, and I knew I was smart in school, but I'd always be like the last one, like when we were in like groups to arrive at a question, but I would still get the same answer. But if you look at like low metabolism or hypothyroidism as a slow flow of energy on all levels, then you can literally see these types of things as just you're getting to the finish line at a slower pace. And actually less is happening too. It's is interesting. So
I know there's like nearly 50% of the population is obese, but I think hypothyroidism is only like 7%. So do you think there's like a large discrepancy there as far as the amount of people that are hypothyroid? And for yourself, how do you test and like kind of make sure that you're staying on track with your metabolism?
yeah, I think the 7%, it's a lot of people have at this point, I think, understood that there's a whole epidemic of low metabolism, essentially. Everything in our environment opposes the metabolism, it lowers our energy. I mean, avoiding things such as sun, avoiding things such as stimulating life has clearly lowered metabolism to the point where these things aren't actually even able to be shown on blood tests for everyone. I mean, this is the thing where you can have multiple different issues with metabolism, such as the suppression of T4, which is the inactive form of thyroid, and then T3 is the active form. So you can have an issue where you're producing enough T4 inactive thyroid, but you aren't converting it to T3 effectively. And that's usually from like a burden on the liver or high estrogen. Like all of these things could suppress the conversion, which T3 is the active form. So if you don't have T3, your cells aren't utilizing thyroid. And what thyroid does essentially is helps you oxidize glucose, so just energy, carbohydrate, into ATP and CO2. So if you don't have the conversion going well, then glucose will not be able to be properly oxidized. Usually, you'll just put it on as fat, to be honest. So when glucose metabolism goes wrong, this is where all the health issues go wrong. So the thing that's also difficult is that the issue of conversion can be the problem, and you can have blood tests that show that your TSH, which is the common test for a thyroid, can actually show normal, so to speak. But normal it's a weird range. I mean, it's at one point it was like 0 to 10, then it was, I think, brought down to 0 to 4 or something. But Ray actually tends to believe that like under 1 is actually a good place to be for good metabolism. I mean, Ray, I think, said somewhere he hasn't seen anybody healthy with the TSH over 1 or something like that. So that could be a good test. But you still could have low TSH and have issues of low metabolism due to these other issues, such as the T4 to T3. But it also could be an issue of thyroid hormone production. So this is usually when your thyroid is being suppressed by your adrenal hormones, usually with the low carb diet. So, I mean, that's the biggest one. But stress also can suppress the thyroid. PUFA consumption, that's another one of the big ones. It actually completely deactivates your response to thyroid hormone. So, again, this is where it can be shown as normal on these tests, but you can have what they call subclinical hypothyroidism. And I think this is generally the state for most people, just in the state of low metabolism, but it's not actually being able to be shown on a test. So this is where actually Broda Barnes, who is a doctor who worked a lot with thyroid patients in the early 20th century, he found that the temperature and the pulse were the two things that could help to actually show someone's thyroid function. So if you think about it, it's really just the heat that you are producing is what is able to show you what your actual metabolic output is like. So Rhoda Barnes, his main way of testing the metabolism was taking your temperature as soon as you wake up. So optimally, your temperature should be around 97.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's upon waking. And then after eating, you want your temperature to increase after eating. Generally, if it falls, that means that eating the meal or eating carbohydrates, whatever it is lowering your cortisol, because cortisol can actually keep your temperature up. So when you eat food and then lower the cortisol from eating, I mean, normally a meal, protein, carbohydrates, fat, that will lower cortisol. So that's a sign that your metabolism is low. If when you take your temperature in the morning is higher than after you eat. So again, these two things are, it's like temperature when you're waking and then right after eating breakfast. So generally, your pulse should also rise. If it's low, if you have a low pulse, that's generally a sign of low metabolism. I mean, there are cases where athletes can have less heartbeats just because due to their heart adjusting. But this also is a thing where it's like endurance exercise in itself suppresses the metabolism. So that's kind of not really like a helpful thing. But the main thing is upon waking, your temperature should be around 97.5 degrees Fahrenheit and rise to around 98.6 in the middle of the day. And then again, the pulse should also rise with that. So if you take your temperature consistently and kind of get a sense of where you are, I think that's a good thing that can guide you, especially with like the foods that you eat, different meals. You can kind of judge how they affect your metabolism based on your temperature. I mean, I don't think it's something that someone needs to religiously check, unless in the case of they're taking thyroid hormone, which again that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that's kind of what I think would be a good way to check.
I think the whole body temperature thing is really interesting because I actually recently saw a video where they were saying that the average temp used to be 98.6, but now they've tested like 125,000 people around like around the year right now, but it was basically like 97.9 or something. Like it was like completely lower. And they were saying that the reason why it's lower now might be due to less infections and people being less sick. And I was just like, it might just be because people are like more likely to be hypothyroid now. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, it's really funny. Just like, well, it's actually not funny, because like there is a whole epidemic of all these diseases that we've never experienced. And I generally think that people saying, okay, well, we're living longer. I mean, that should be a good thing. We're in better health. We have all of these Western medicine and different procedures that can be done to help lengthen your lifespan. But I think you need to think of the sense of we're living longer, but we're in worse health, unable to do as much. I mean, people that are so young are dealing with issues that elderly were dealing with. I mean, digestive issues. It's like people are showing early onset dementia, like schizophrenia, like all of these things were typically seen in old age. And it's just getting younger and younger that people are having these complex health issues. So that's, I think, the big context is that if we see lowering temperatures and we see the correlation of PUFA consumption, seed oil consumption, all of these things coming together to decrease people's body temperature and life, thus health, it should be kind of understood. But again, it's kind of difficult to take that information and be like, oh, okay, we actually need to deal with this on a systemic level. That's actually not what they want to do, because no one can control it on a systemic level. That's the whole thing of autonomy, is that if you have a holistic system, they're interconnected parts. There's no one centralized source that can feed you the answer, you know? So that's where it becomes a whole division between seeing life in a holistic framework, the more bioenergetic view, and seeing it in the Western centralized view, you know?
That's one of the things I've heard Danny Roddy say that's really interesting is just he doesn't think that he could ever tell someone better than they can tell themselves like what they should be doing, which I would argue some people they just are so out of touch with themselves they don't actually know how the food or like experience or environments kind of interacting with them and causing them to feel a worse way than they actually are. But I'm curious to know if you had any person or like coach you had to like guide you along your like biogenic path, or if you just kind of rode alone solo, like seeking out information on your own.
Yeah, it's I'd see like Danny and essentially Georgie as like guys that I'd like really look to, and it was actually funny because interacting with them was really after I sort of had to take care of like things on myself. But this is, I think, an interesting thing, because for me, it got to the point where I was literally forced to figure out what I know now. I mean, I really had no other option. I mean, I was experiencing symptoms to the point where they were so debilitating. I wasn't really even doing much. I was just pretty much laying in bed, just like hanging out all day. Couldn't really feel like I could take action on pretty much anything that I wanted to. And it was just really just like a depressing period. So it was all that I was left with was reading, was researching my issues, looking things up. And it's like for me that was actually good in the sense that I could become sort of knowledgeable about the things that I'm experiencing. But when it's not as bad for someone, I think it's difficult to actually want to seek it out. So that's where I think someone like online, that's like posting information, can really be good to lean into. I mean, of course, now just so many more people are really getting into this philosophy, and I think just the people on Twitter, just like Anabology, Analyze and Optimize, just myself, like guys like us younger, we're really just trying to promote everyone to look towards the actual real sources, like Ray. Just listen to the podcast of the Ray, read Ray's articles and stuff like that, because really there's just so much in that. And even the Ray Peat forum can be good, but I mean, a lot of people kind of don't like that just because of how insane it is there, which I fully agree with. But I actually did find a lot from reading the Ray Peat forum. If I would look up any of my issues, like literally like looking up what I was experiencing, followed by Ray Peat, or like Ray Peat X issue, that would do so much. And I mean, that's what I included. I actually did the video like on the introduction to Ray Peat, and that's one of the things that I mentioned. And it seems like a lot of other people have shared that experience. And yeah, it's interesting. Just like I kind of viewed that as like my sort of coach or tool, but like there are like good sites that can condense the information. But ultimately, it came down to me taking notes, you know, and just thinking like, okay, what do I need to learn? Like, what do I actually like have an issue with right now? And just like watching a video or reading an article, getting multiple articles and taking notes on that, and then actually kind of like studying it back. But like, it wasn't necessarily out of like a desire to, like, yeah, I love learning, but like, of course, it's always good to learn. But it was more so like, I need to understand this if I want to be able to function again. So that ultimately I think is the best teacher. So
Yeah. I think Ray's philosophy in general is so applicable to modern life and just everything that we're dealing with now in terms of environment and how poor it is and causing all of us to kind of have to like seek out other alternatives as far as like not even be able to go to a fast food restaurant without getting hit with seed oils, or even just like a normal restaurant you're probably getting hit with a bunch of chemicals and additives. And the food supply in general has like glyphosate on it, and I don't know, fed all kinds of antibiotics and whatnot. So I'm curious, like, what is your best technique you found to getting like better sourcing for your food and just like supplements in general? Like, how do you get good, clean products for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it generally just like requires an understanding where everything that you look at, you can know where a possible issue could arise. So I think the first one to start with is usually supplements. I mean, the contamination of supplements is, I think, so undervalued. I mean, at this point, more people are tuning on to that, but if you just look at the things included in supplements, I mean, like citric acid, there. I mean, there's usually literally like seed oils, like sunflower oil or different things. Like citrate supplements. There's like titanium dioxide, silica. These things are like clearly issues and can cause just all sorts of problems when you're ingesting just like supplements, pretty much. So I tend to think like looking for places that can give you just a pure, usually like third party tests are good. Supplement or stuff like that could be useful. Like there's this website called Toxinless. It was by a guy in the Ray sphere. He actually made a great website for supplements and finding good quality stuff. That's usually he'll list if they're tested or whatnot. So that was a good thing. And also you can look up like if you have questions about like any sort of added ingredient, if you look that up on like the Ray Peat forum or whatnot, there's almost always someone that can tell you what is wrong with a certain supplement or whatnot. So looking at ingredient labels and just understanding that you want to be as simple as possible and as known as possible. So essentially like by known I mean like you want to understand that this is real food that you're looking at. Like again, like this is a good example is ice cream. Like it should really just be milk, cream, eggs, sugar, salt, and you don't want to see carrageenan or guar gum or like any of the different gums and thickeners because these things can cause digestive irritation. And then carrageenan is actually a carcinogen. And that's just one example, but like any food that you go to the store to get, generally like most packaged food is just an abomination. You know, it's just filled with seed oils, or filled with just like poor quality grains or whatnot. But I think like if you just like kind of trust that being more careful is better than trying something that has a possible ingredient that you're not sure about, I think it's always good to stay on the safe side. Like again, like grass-fed food is something that I think is great. Ray generally, he generally was a fan of like local, like seasonal food, but in the case of like that not being available, just getting whatever is digestible and just doing using like experimentation to find out. Because I mean, for someone with like more issues, it's kind of easier to tell what works and what doesn't work. Because I mean, they'll kind of know right away. But for someone that doesn't have as serious of a health issue, sometimes it could be difficult to actually know what would be good or bad until like maybe down the line they start experiencing something. So again, it's just I think good to stay with simpler, staying with local, grass fed. I mean, trying to go to farms. There's like real milk for milk, raw milk to find. But again, like raw milk isn't even something that I think someone needs to do. I mean, again, I think just listening to your digestion is really like the number one thing because I think a lot of people could actually get away with like just eating things that would completely debilitate someone like me or someone that has had like a history of issues. But again, it's just I think about figuring out what works for your context and what allows you to function at the level that you want to. So if that means trying to look up every single ingredient, then that could be the thing. Or it could just be eating what's available and what's a good price and what you think will actually be able to keep you going for a long time. So
Makes sense. I'm curious for you, did you ever try low carb? And if you did, like, did you find that low carbing or exercising too much was like more detrimental to you? And then like, how did you progress through both of those if you had both?
yeah, I was not I wouldn't say low carb, but I was definitely lower carb. I was probably like eating closer to like the more like animal based type diet before my issues got like really bad. So I was like into like the whole philosophy of Ray, but I really wasn't incorporating much of it, to be honest. I mean, I was just like eating the carrot salad once in a while, or just like eating like dairy once in a while, and just like having the general idea of like eating protein and carb together. And that was kind of what I was working on, just mainly eating like grass-fed red meat and just like potatoes, rice, for like the bulk of my diet essentially. But I was also having stuff like I would have like avocados like a lot or stuff like that. So not a lot. I'd have avocados sometimes, just like chicken sometimes, just things that Ray would generally like advise against. But um, it came to the point where it was like after that, like working out and having like a kind of low carb diet. That's actually when I started having issues with like my like SIBO or like whatever it was with my digestion. And I actually found that when I was having not enough digestible carbs, it was mainly like I was eating like root vegetables, like potatoes, and those things, those starches, actually gave me issues because just again, if you're eating things that take a while to digest, then that can cause issues. And that was on top of working out 5 or 6 days a week. So all these things kind of irritating the gut lining, and then kind of leading to the SIBO overgrowth, and leading to the issue of needing to like upregulate my gut motility essentially by avoiding all of these things that were taking a while to digest or completely indigestible. So
Mhm. Since you started creating online, have you learned a lot more about the bioenergetic view, and how do you kind of weave creating on Twitter and with like Ray's philosophy and like the ideas of kind of like doing work that you enjoy?
it's been interesting. I mean, like something I've just found really liberating was I actually came to Twitter just like when I was just at such a low spot with my health. I mean, I always was a creative person. I mean, I was working on like a clothing project before this, but that's actually when my health issues started like coming about. Was I was working on this project. I was kind of really the only one committed, and I think that's kind of when my like stress was really like becoming an issue, and I just could not really deal with the fact that I was the only person committed to this like spiritually. Like that's kind of what like led me to, I think, develop most of the issues as seriously as they were, to be honest. So I was in just at a bad point and just again learning, and then came to Twitter, just like interacting with people because I would always see people in this sphere, and I kind of fell into it one day just to, I think maybe I think I found Analyze and Optimize was the first person I saw, and after that I started finding all the other guys on here. I mean on Twitter or X or whatever. So it became like I would just sort of circle around on people's accounts and whatnot. And then I got to a point where I was just like, I think I should just start either replying to people and asking questions, or just like actually just tweeting myself. Because I mean, it's a cool thing to me. I've always been creative, but it was like dealing with the health issues, all that was stuck within me. And that's what I realized is that the same thing that equates to physical digestion is mental or spiritual digestion. All of my creative ideas were stuck within me, not able to be assimilated, not being able to be digested essentially. So it was like when I was interacting with people at first, it was really sort of helping me to like discover things. But in the process of like sharing, like because I'd say I have had a decent understanding at that point. In the process of sharing, I was actually reinforcing my own learning and actually learning even more by actually like writing a thread or something about like carbon dioxide, or just like doing something that is like talking about like learned helplessness, something that I am legitimately like right past. Like I just made it past this or something like that. Or I think it's like when you can like view learning or sharing as something as a process rather than something that you need to be a full, complete expert on. I think as long as you're honest about where you are with the situation, I think that liberates you to do anything. And ultimately, like, that's, I think, why I can deal, or anybody actually in the Pete sphere can deal with the issues that they deal with and still share what they share. And I think that's such a great way of seeing it because it allows us to understand that nothing is meant to be perfect. I mean, the perfect gets in the way of good, essentially. I mean, that's kind of the idea.
When I started getting into Twitter, I was seeing all these accounts that were saying, "Oh, like I have certain issues, such as like not having gut motility or not being able to eat carbs without feeling like they're bloating and all these like certain health conditions that I thought were kind of unique to me. And at the time I was just hearing people say like, oh, just cut out carbs, just only meat, just like only eat animal products and all this stuff. So it kind of opened up a new sphere when I saw people who did deal with these same problems I had, but then were able to fix them eating sugar, eating carbohydrates, foods that I wanted to eat the whole time. So I'm curious if you kind of had that same point of view when you said you started to get onto Twitter and see that people were chiming in about the peat philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're told the idea that you shouldn't eat things that taste too good or whatnot, but when you're actually able to like let yourself let go of that idea, because I feel like most people who come to this philosophy have been through the gamut of avoiding things, the gamut of discipline, like working out really extreme diets. I think when you're able to let yourself go and just only just eat things that you legitimately enjoy, I do think that it can just kind of liberate you in itself just of eating things that taste good. But I think also people can run into issues where it's almost like you can take it to an excess. You most definitely can, and I think I've seen that with people. Analyze and optimize. He talked about it recently that when he like started to like get into the Pete philosophy and like improve his digestion, he was actually putting on weight. And the thing is like your health can get better, but you can actually run into things such as you're not caring about your appearance as much, or your appearance will suffer. You're not building muscle. Like for me, that's what it was. Or it's like someone is eating an excess of carbs or eating an excess of any. Like think of Georgie. Georgie worked out before, he gained weight, but again, the dude is healthy now, and he is actually like doing so much more than anybody who complains about his appearance. So that's I think the thing that kind of blew my mind about this is that what matters most is the function, and the appearance comes second. I mean, you can always, I think, get back to an optimal point in terms of, okay, you look healthy or whatnot, or you look good. But I think it's actually second to the function, either of digestion. I think it's the main one. And I think really it's also like for some people dealing with like whatever issue they came from before, like being like obese or whatever, just like finding this idea of just going low carb. And it's I think important to just remember when you're taking it too far. I mean, I think eating like 500 grams of like table sugar every day is not the best idea. But again, it's like certain situations require you to take actually like measures that would not really make sense in another situation. That's I think the importance of realizing where you are. Like me stopping working out was something I didn't really want to do, but it came to the point where I realized I would rather function well and actually live. So it didn't really become like an issue for me to stop working out. And I generally think like by sticking with my intuition, just by following my gut, essentially following the symptoms of my gut, I think I'll be able to get back to whatever point that I ever could possibly want to. And I think that's generally what people have seen. I mean, if you look at the people who've been like peating, so to speak, or following like a bioenergetic pro metabolic view, for a long period, I mean, a lot of them have really overcome any issue that they possibly had. And if not overcome, they have the tools to actually get there. Or they have the tools to just really understand and put it into what matters. And that's just, I think, functioning with a high level of consciousness. So,
I think it all ties back to kind of the environment we live in, not just how it's like harming us, but then also just the way that they tell you you need to be eating a certain way or um, exercising a certain amount in order to like look a certain way. So it's like all about like the appearance on the outside rather than like you said, like the human, how the person's actually functioning and how they're feeling. So I'm curious, like when did that like kind of flip for you in your like journey? Because I think for me, like at first I was like, oh, I get to eat like good food. And then I just started to realize like, oh, it's like not really about as much like the restriction. It's more about just like being able to feel my body. So I am able to like be nice to another person and not be like all mad because I'm restricting myself, and kind of just a lot of the problems I did deal with that happened to be with like mostly like internal, which is like my relationship with myself, but it was like caused by bad health, I think.
Yeah, it's something I was like really, really just became clear with the digestion. I mean, again, like feeling like I'm losing muscle or essentially just not looking as good. I mean, just overall, I mean, I think like even like my like skin isn't as good or whatnot, but I mean, like these types of things would just fucking destroy me. And I realized that it wasn't about the fact that like, okay, I'm looking worse and these people look better or whatnot. It was about like, okay, well, what am I actually dealing with? You know, like I'm dealing with this serious issue that needs to get taken care of. So it's like it became so much more important just by necessity, and then kind of I didn't find that I could ever reach that conclusion without having to fucking, or sorry, I keep swearing, without having to experience that firsthand. So it's like that was the main thing. It's just that I had no option, you know. But that's, I think, kind of how someone grows, is when they have no option. And ultimately, like I think that's part of like the philosophy of like, well, what actually gets someone past a health issue? I think it needs to get much worse before it gets better in all situations, not even just health. I think in all situations, the will to grow or the necessity for growth comes from this, or comes from necessity. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that because a lot of times it's like you only know how good you could feel when you feel so bad. Like if you're just in a comfortable state, whether it be like with relationships or money or anything like that, there's not really that urge to change when you're in a comfortable spot. So yeah. But thank you for coming on the
totally.
podcast, Nate. How can people reach out to you and kind of get in touch with a lot of the stuff you do? I really like your one video about Ray P. If anyone ever asks me about him, I just send them that clip. But
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, I'm on Twitter at Nate Lawerence underscore, and then all other social medias, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, but I don't really do much on TikTok. My Substack is natelawrence.substack.com. And like I said, YouTube, Instagram are Nate Lawrence GC. And yeah, I appreciate it, Luke. It means a lot to be on here. So
yep. All right, see you, Nate.
yeah, appreciate it.